Welcome back to the Your Project Shepherd Construction Podcast. Our last episode ended with Brian and Heather enjoying one last solo date night before baby number two's arrival. As they drove home, they decided to stop by their soon-to-be new home that's still under construction. After some sweet and quiet moments, they take the scenic route back through the neighborhood. What was supposed to be an easy and slow evening changed when Brian spotted Derek's sign in front of another person's house, meaning he and Heather were not his only clients as promised. But just as Brian's about to call Derek and give him a piece of his mind, Heather's water breaks and changes the course of the night. Luckily, her sister was babysitting, so they rushed straight to the hospital, completely forgetting about Derek for the time being. So for the next couple of weeks, Brian and Heather's focus shifts to adapting to life with the new baby. Brian spends his time trying to corral the toddler while trying to help Heather change diapers and rock the baby to sleep as much as possible. But it doesn't take long for them to start worrying about the house again. Now that they've added the fourth family member in their small home, even more pressure seems to be on to get the build finished. To stay on top of things, they've demanded a weekly progress meeting on the job site with Derek. So early one Monday morning, before heading to work, Brian meets Derek at the home. The house looks like it's finally taking shape. The drywall's all hung and taped, and the crew is there putting mud on the walls to float them. Brian says, "Hey Derek, now that the drywall's up, I'm thinking that we can start installing doors and trim. What do you think?" Derek raises an eyebrow, hesitates for a moment, and says, "Well, the mud still has to dry, then they have to sand, then the texture has to be applied. It's going to be several more weeks until we get to that point." He can feel Brian's blood starting to boil, so he says, "There's really nothing I can do. It takes time for drywall mud to dry between these steps. Believe me, I've spent a lot of time researching how to speed this process up, but there's just no way." Brian just rolls his eyes in annoyance and continues his walk around the house, looking at the checklist and schedule that he made himself. As the days go by, Brian realizes he's literally just watching mud dry, and things are getting even busier at work, so he decides he doesn't need to be at the job site every day anymore. A couple more weeks pass, and Derek lets them know that the drywall is finally done and they're ready to start doors and trim. Heather's been going stir crazy being at home with the new baby, and she feels like she's finally ready to get out and visit the construction site again. So they schedule a time with Vivian to do a walkthrough. Arriving at the site and holding the baby close to her chest, Heather enters first and immediately freezes. Standing there with a smile is Derek. He's proud that they're finally going to the next phase. But Heather is visibly upset. She just stares at the heavy, sprayed-on orange peel texture all over the walls and ceiling. Derek says, "What's wrong? I figured you'd be happy to see where things are." Heather clenches her teeth and says, "Why is there this heavy texture all over my walls?" Derek says, "Well, that's how we always finish the walls. It helps to cover the imperfections from framing, and the drywall guys don't have to spend as much time floating." Suddenly, Rick's comments to them about the number three lumber start to make sense in their minds. This is what he was concerned about. Heather says, "Well, you wouldn't have to cover imperfections if you hadn't bought the crappy lumber." Derek starts to get very defensive and says, "Well, I was just trying to do my part to control costs for you. You were so adamant about this budget, and that was such an easy thing to do. And as for this drywall, sanding walls smooth costs way more and takes a lot more time." "We talked about how important smooth walls and high-end finishes were," Vivian chips in. "We are not accepting this garbage." Derek says, "Well, it'll take a few more weeks and several $1,000s more to sand all this texture off and float it smooth. That's just going to delay our trim and doors and cabinets." "Just do it," Brian yells at Derek. He and Heather turn around and storm out of the house. They hadn't noticed that Vivian had already slipped out during the exchange and is now sitting on the curb with her head in her hands. "I'm done," she says. "I can't work with that man anymore. He clearly has no idea what he's doing, and I don't want my design reflected in his crappy work. And it's clear that my presence is not making enough of a difference in this project. You should have had someone checking things along the way, like the framing, to make sure it doesn't affect your finishes. I did my best to catch all the plumbing and lighting errors, but there's just too much. There are so many mistakes." Everyone's silent for a minute. Brian and Heather just stare at each other. They don't know what to do. They really need Vivian's guidance to deal with Derek. "Listen," Vivian says, I've got a guy you can call. He's what's called an owner's representative. I worked with him on another project, and he was good at working with the builder to get results when things weren't going so well. Maybe he can help you here. I just can't anymore. Heather says, we can't afford to pay another person at this point. Besides, Brian's been handling this and meeting with Derek every week, and things have been going better. We just don't need another person and another expense. No, they haven't been going better, Vivian says. And poor Brian has been trying to balance this house, his job, all of this, and helping you with the kids, and it's just too much for him and for your marriage. They both know Vivian's right. Brian's never been more stressed in his life, and it's really been taking a toll on his relationship with Heather. They've been fighting all the time, which they'd never done in their 10 plus years of marriage. Okay, Brian said, give us his information and we'll check into it. Brian and Heather drive home in silence. They know deep down they can't do this alone, and Vivian just bailed. After getting both of the kids down for a nap, they decided to call James, the owner's rep that Vivian referred them to. On the phone, James immediately puts them at ease. Vivian already called and gave him a rundown on the situation. He had unfortunately seen this before, and he invited them to come by his office the next morning for a consultation. I wish you'd called me sooner, James said, but it's not too late. We can get this thing turned around as long as Derek is willing to work with me. Well, what if he isn't? Heather asked. Hopefully it won't come to that, and if it does, we'll just have to work with an attorney to terminate the contract. From what I've seen of his dinky online forms, it shouldn't be that hard. But I really don't think we're going to have to do that. Guys like Derek sometimes just need a little guidance and education, and I'm pretty experienced at making them feel like I'm there to help them too. At the end of the day, we all have the same goal, and that's to get this house finished and to make you as happy as we can. Nobody, even Derek, wants this to end in a lawsuit. James goes on to explain that he will now be the point person for the project. He will handle all communications with Derek, and he will conduct regular job site meetings with Derek and the subcontractors to make sure they're all on the same page and the quality is where it should be. Brian and Heather will have minimal interaction with Derek from this point on, which is music to their ears. He also feels confident that he can get Vivian back on board to see her designs through to completion. Although his fees aren't cheap, Brian and Heather decide that it's worth it for the sake of their mental health and their marriage. And James assures them that he can likely save them money on construction by limiting mistakes that cost them money and to push the schedule along to save more mortgage payments. I wish we'd known about you sooner, Brian said. We've been trying to do this all ourselves, and it's cost us so much. And I'm not just talking about money. Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of the Your Project Shepherd Construction Podcast. We are your personal guide to the home construction process. I'm your host, Curtis Lawson, and you hear me say this each week, and I keep repeating it because it's so super important, and it's the foundation of what we teach here. We teach that every successful project must have 4 key components that are represented by this simple child sketch of a house. The foundation is planning, the left wall is your team, the right wall is communication, and the roof is proper execution. If you have all these components, your project will succeed. Today, I am joined by my guest, Bradley Hirdes. Am I saying your last name right?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
spot on.
You know, it's like I talk to you all the time and I see you and then I'm like, oh my God, did I butcher his last name? I actually did that with another guest. I totally butchered their last name and we stopped recording and I re-recorded it. So
nice.
At least I didn't screw it up too
Nailed
bad.
it.
So awesome. So Bradley's an architect here in the Houston area, and he was in the design build space with a partner, but he is transitioning to doing architecture only, and he has started a new company, and it's called Ordinary Architecture Practice.
That's right.
So tell us about that name, because we were joking about that a minute ago. Like, does it mean you're just building like a white vanilla box, or what does Ordinary Architecture Practice mean?
Well, the initial idea too is that it would spur on these conversations.
Right.
Like, why are you ordinary? Is the architecture you design ordinary? What's the deal?
Is everything really boring?
The short answer is just yes. No. Well, so, most of our lives are lived in just kind of ordinary times and spaces, and the idea is that those ordinary spaces deserve the same amount of attention that we devote to the extraordinary spaces and times, those special moments in life. whether it be public spaces or private spaces. Just devoting that attention and that design energy to those ordinary spaces and times.
Awesome. I love that. And you guys are doing some cool projects right now. I know we were talking about this. Y'all are actually getting into doing some 3D printed stuff. Is that right? Why don't you tell us something about that?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm sure a lot of your listeners might have heard of the 3D printing house technology, and not just houses, but structures in
Yeah.
general. It's an emerging technology that's really starting to gain a lot of traction. And we felt like there was a need for that, the execution of that technology in a economical way, because you can really leverage that technology to produce structures and houses in an economical way, because the material is really cheap. I mean, you're printing with concrete, bags of concrete. You're ordering it from wherever. It can be, you're printing with local sand. It's all easily accessible materials. It's just a matter of executing it and refining that process. And there's not a lot of people in this space that are leveraging the economies of this, and so we're really trying to find a way to do that and making some headway.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I want to come check out those projects and see this in action.
Yeah, we're right in the middle of doing the pilot project. So and so far so good. Like, proving concept is we're there. So
That's awesome. So that's not why you're here today. We're here to talk about a little more mundane stuff, but
ordinary stuff.
Yeah, ordinary. So we've been going through this story in this podcast where we're following this couple, Brian and Heather, and they've been making every mistake in the book as they go through this construction process. And now they're in the middle of building this home, and they're finding that some of the things that were on the plans aren't necessarily what happened in the field. And so that happens a lot. Things make it onto the plans. They don't always translate into the field, and that can be problems with the plans. It can be interpretation of the plans. It can be just flat ignoring the plans. But so but before we get into that, we've discussed with some of our other guests how houses are like more complex now than they used to be. Than like our homes that we're building are more complex than what my dad or granddad or whoever would have built back in the day. And part of that's some of the building performance that's mandated by energy codes and just structural codes and things like that. And some of it's new technology. And then some of it's just like the expectations that clients have. I think the consumers in some ways are more educated than they used to be, and they expect a higher level of product and execution. So what are your thoughts on that, about homes just being more complex?
It is. I mean, a lot of it starts with information is just disseminated and so much more easily these days. And so it's just more accessible to people. And so I'll find that more clients are more educated. And that's a big part of it. The expectations seem to be a little higher, or maybe not higher, but more specific in certain areas that you might not have dove into with clients before,
Right.
just because this information is easily accessible on the internet and elsewhere. But as well, like you had touched on, building technologies have advanced dramatically, and it seems like it's incrementally advanced each year.
Yeah.
And so trying to understand those aspects of those technologies and incorporate them into the design, and then into the construction of the house adds just layers of complexity to what we do. And so I think on every angle, houses just tend to be way more complex in that way. And I often say that 90% of my job is mitigating expectations. And that's, I think, because we have so much more information available to our clients.
I think also that when you have this higher level of detail that's expected, higher level of just what you have to do, again, because of codes or whatever, because of that higher level of complexity, more planning is needed, more seats at the table. In my house diagram that I mentioned at the beginning, you've got to have that foundation of planning, and you got to have the team established early on in the project. So just on that, like, how many different people are involved before a house ever even,
Yeah.
before a spade of dirt gets turned?
Well, there's a lot, and it varies depending on project, but um, you usually need a good handful of in your team of consultants, architect, and then you've got kind of the engineer category of structural engineering is a pretty critical component to your project. Um, Often in larger tracts of land, you'll need civil engineers involved. But even in a small project, you're going to need surveys and soils reports, because you got to have the engineer has to have something, has to know what the ground is in order to give you the right foundation. So you've got all of these kind of engineering components beforehand. Building performance is consultation is a big part of what I would recommend on the team. It's a because of what we talked about earlier, the complexities of building materials and techniques and methodologies. It's really important to have that kind of third view in the mix. Me as an architect, I'm kind of charged with coordinating all of this stuff on the front end. But I don't know all of these parts and pieces. Like, for example, the structural engineer knows the structure, the civil engineer knows the ground, the building performance consultant has a pulse beat on more on these technologies and how to integrate them with each other in a successful way.
Yeah, and how they interact with the environment.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. There's so many parts and pieces to the houses that you just need these specialties involved and have their eyes on the project. And the earlier the better, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I always engage these consultants and engineers very early on in the process.
Yeah. Yeah, and even the other kind of the sexier stuff. So the interior design and the millwork and cabinetry, all that kind of stuff. All that really should be brought into play during the design phase as well before construction starts.
Yeah,
Because you have to know how all that stuff's going to fit in with the design.
absolutely. So there's kind of the critical base of consultants that you need and people on the team that you need. And then there's there are some other um, uh, designers and other consultants that may not be part of every project. It just may not be the right fit for the client or the actual project. And it also depends on who you're starting with as well. Like, different architects can provide different services
Sure.
based on experience and training.
Yeah.
And there, certain designers and architects can provide interior design services, landscape design services. But it's very, very common to have an interior designer on the project, landscape architect on the project, lighting design.
Lighting design.
Yeah,
Maybe.
lighting design it could be a huge one.
It's getting bigger. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Especially when you get into these bigger spaces, or if there's specialty requirements such as a really nice art collection.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that that stuff is paid attention to. I mean, wine room consultants.
Oh, yeah.
And you can just keep going. Like, there are so many specialties. It just depends on the needs of the client.
Yeah. And so when we have all of these various players who have either an opinion or a specification,
Everybody's got an opinion.
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
for sure.
or a drawing that has to be followed
Yeah.
because that's what the client's paying for, right? I mean, the client, they deserve to get all these various people that they're paying for, like to see their design put into effect. So when you've got architectural and engineering and interior design and landscape design and lighting design and all this stuff.
Security is huge.
Yeah.
Audio visual. Yeah.
So when all these people are in the room or at the table, how do we make sure that all those things are actually getting built? Like how do you make sure that all those things are actually happening the way they're supposed to?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. I think it's important to have a very kind of comprehensive and up-to-date package of drawings and specifications. And in my view, that's my job. My job is not just to design the space, but to also coordinate all of these individual specialties and create this one clear and concise package and make sure they all work together. Because oftentimes, a structural engineer will specify something that does not fly with or is a serious conflict. I don't know, 90% of jobs will have this at least, where you've got a beam in the way of a duct, and the examples are plentiful, but it's making sure that me as an architect is making sure that those conflicts are resolved. So there's a concept in architecture just called problem seeking. Like, I'm looking for these problems, seeking out these problems, trying to find where they are, and then coming up with the solutions to those problems and resolving them. And oftentimes that is communicating and coordinating with multiple trades and multiple consultants.
Yeah. And so one of the services that most architects offer is construction administration, call it CA for short. Is that something that you do?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's critical to the success of a project.
Yeah.
Additionally to the success of a project, and coming kind of back to coordinating all of these efforts, for me, I think it's important to have a builder involved early on. There's a couple of ways to help make that successful, and that's to make a project successful. And doing that is having a builder involved early to be able to have their eyes on the drawing set from the beginning, just kind of pointing out potential conflicts that are not seen. It always helps to have that second set of eyes, and then pricing things along the way.
Yeah, budget input.
Budget is huge. Yeah. I mean, even us as architects, we're supposed to provide, we start with a budget, and then we're supposed to provide a budget of what we design. A lot of architects are not, skilled in that realm, just necessarily so. But so that's why it's real helpful to have a builder involved early on.
So for CA, and for other inspections, like what points of construction are some typical points for us to kind of, press pause, let's say, on the project for a day or a week or whatever, to accomplish, all the inspections that have to be done to verify all these things are being done right.
Yeah.
What are some kind of common phase checks?
Common phase checks usually are happening before, like your major pauses, let's say, are happening before something gets covered. When you're prepping the groundwork, you're laying the foundation for the project, literally, you want to have this hard pause to make sure that everything, before you cover it up with concrete, everything is in the right space, in the right spot, that dimensions are where they're supposed to be. Anchor bolts and hold downs and all the necessary stuff that is specified by either engineers or other consultants is in the right spot. Same thing when you cover the walls, and like, if it's gonna get covered, you want to stop. That's right. and look at it. As well, like there's kind of necessarily some of these other stops and pauses when, say for example, electrical. Like, usually you'll box a house out, and then you want to walk that, because a lot of times, this is just stuff on paper, and we do this all the time, and so it's a lot easier for us to conceptualize this.
Yeah.
But when a homeowner looks at a sheet and it's got outlets here,
or switches placed on a wall,
switches placed on the wall, it's often not as, that's why they hire us.
Yeah, it doesn't register.
Because they hire us to do it and to price them appropriately. But it might be placed perfectly how you or I would want it. But then a client might say, "Oh, I do this one thing, I always end up getting up in the middle of the night to do whatever, and I want to have a switch here," or so, any number of situations.
So before the wire gets pulled, you can move those boxes, those switch boxes, those outlets, those recess cans, whatever. You can shift those around at that point pretty easily, because it's just popping a couple nails loose and moving the box.
Yeah, that's right.
Versus once all that wire is pulled, it's a lot harder, and usually the electrician's charging money at that point.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So you want to stop and check at each of these phases before either things are covered or the second kind of final phase of whatever that task is done, like boxes and then wire, or it could be with millwork too, just making sure that, okay, now that the walls are up, is this where we want this cabinet, or any number of situations like that. But that, for me in the CA process, like, that is, I'm always communicating with the contractor as well to say, okay, let's walk this, let's check in. I know that the client needs to do this too, but also there might be a time that it's just architect and builder that walk it, just to kind of prep before that meeting, just to as kind of a kind of pre-phase walk check that allows us to be a little more prepared in that and when we do the client walk. So yeah, that's kind of a big component of CA. Another thing with CA as well is, like you had said earlier, construction administration is a way that the clients can assure that what they've paid for in their design is built to what they want, or what they're
Expect.
getting and what they expect. That's right.
Yeah. So, what are some common things that get missed? You know, I think the electrical stuff that you mentioned is pretty common. Either missed might be the wrong word, but that needs to be checked, or it just can just be missed or done wrong by contractor. What are some common things that you would catch in a phase check?
Um, well, there might. So, oftentimes in drawings, we're trying to convey an intent or convey something very specific. And it's hard to do it in just one drawing, and it might be missed, whether it's like a sill height for a window, or um, um, it could be electrical is a really common one. Uh, Duct locations. There's things that just, like, there's some things that just kind of necessarily need to be assumed, and nobody's kind of faulted for them. There's plenty of stuff to fault to be
Yeah.
thrown around, but
Yeah.
I think, in a good relationship, that's not done. But there's some necessarily some things that need to be assumed that we can then kind of review, because a set of drawings is not going to have every single detail that needs to be looked at and built in a project.
Right. And I've said this on several episodes. We're all human. Everybody makes some mistakes. Architects make mistakes. Engineers make mistakes. Builders make mistakes. Everybody makes a mistake. So yeah, it's not necessarily that somebody did a bad job. It's we're human. It's a product that a human's producing. So it's a way also for us to catch someone else's honest mistake. I've yet to do a job where I have a perfect set of drawings from everybody. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
and I've never built a perfect house, and probably never will. Things always happen. So it's kind of a way of keeping each other accountable for what we should be doing, right?
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And it's a conversation. Bringing a home to life is like what we're doing here. It's questions and answers. It's bringing things up that might not have been thought of by either architect or builder, and it's an exchange and a back and forth, and that's how the something gets built. Like, and additionally, like, what might be drawn might not ultimately be the best solution, and sometimes you don't see that until you inhabit that space,
Right.
whether it be just a space that's framed or sheetrocked or sheathed or whatever. It could, there's it's important to be able to kind of go along with the process and be able to adjust if needed.
Yeah. I think what happens sometimes is builders see CA and phase checks inspection as being an adversarial thing. I actually see this a lot, because
Yeah.
that architect's going to come in here and mess up my project and change everything and whatever. Um, that's definitely not the attitude that I've ever had, because I always see it as, again, it's collaborative. We're trying to give the customer the best product. I would say it's probably more common with, let's say, old school builders. They're like, I don't
Sure.
want that architect on my job, so I get him out of here.
Yeah, that's my
But
experience too.
how do you keep those situations from being adversarial? If you've got that old school guy, or just somebody who feels like you're stepping on his toes.
Yeah, yeah. Part of how I do that is kind of twofold. Number one, I've got some actual experience swinging a hammer. Like, I know I know what's going on in framing, in
Right.
all the various stages in construction process. And so a lot of times I'm able to relate to builders that are perhaps adversarial or
Yeah.
not thrilled about an architect on site by saying, yeah, I've, slung bunks of plywood up, 2 floors on a 12-12 pitch, like I've done that.
Yeah.
I went to architecture school, did not do that my entire life,
Right.
but I have done it. And then, so hopefully that's, kind of establishes some credit. And I know that like good architects and not ones that haven't had that experience also are willing to kind of dig in with a builder to say, okay, um, I understand like your resistance, but I'm willing to engage in that process and not just be dismissive because that's like one approach I think that good architects will take. Another one is to really from the beginning establish a relationship with the builder that is very open and very communicative. It seems like a lot of work sometimes, or it can be, but I just find that just having a positive attitude from the beginning with a builder, and it could be that you have to do that with like multiple builders before somebody's decides on a
Yeah.
builder, but it just sets the tone for a relationship that will, I think, be better and easier throughout the process.
Yeah.
And so, kind of going back to what you had said earlier about these phase checks and things happening that may not be go to plan. It is a two-way street where builders and things on site might happen not like they're in the drawings, and then we have to adjust. But it also happens that something is drawn and there's a conflict with the real built condition, and so I think additionally, as an architect, I need to be able to adapt and solve that problem when it arises, and not just push back and say, no, do it like this. Now, there are certain things where it's important to say that, but having that relationship and that credibility already built up makes it a lot easier to do
Sure.
that when the time comes.
Yeah. If there's something that's like blatantly wrong,
Yeah, that's right.
we got to fix it.
Well, and admitting your mistakes. Like when I miss something, I'll be like, oh yeah, that's my bad. And okay, so let's come up with a solution. Work with me because I need help on this. It's try to ask so many questions of builders whenever we go through the process, and I think asking so many questions can produce an ultimately better solution when the time comes that one's needed.
Yeah. Sometimes there are things on the plans, and the builder might not catch them, or maybe the builder um, just doesn't know enough to catch them. And honestly, this is pretty common, where somebody will hire somebody who's and this kind of goes back to the Texas not having licensure for builders like most states do. But so you get like a new builder or an inexperienced person who doesn't read plans, and so now they're trusting their subcontractors to execute, and the subcontractor may not be that educated either. Often he's the lowest bid guy. Um, so anyway, we're basically like the blind leading the blind on executing a plan. So anyway, like what I'm saying is there may be like some details on the plan that no one either sees or knows how to read.
Yeah.
And I think one of the most common places I see this is like in like cornice work. Like there'll be like a cornice detail on the plans, and the framer just slap, and the cornice guy just slap up
Yeah.
what they always do on every house, and they ignore the detail. Um, are there any other things that get kind of like that cornice work that you see people just kind of blow by and do the standard thing and ignore the plans?
Yeah, there's a lot of framing details that happens in. Um, just oftentimes, if you're looking for the type of caliber of house that you'll hire architects for, like there will be situations that are just not standard in construction.
Yeah.
Whether it's like some cantilevered beam that's catching another beam, that's missed. I had this situation. It was in framing where they just like they had supports up holding the roof up, and they just completely missed the beam. And I was like, so what's going to happen when you take the supports down? How's that going to work? Kind of to the point of missing things as well. Like oftentimes when architects are drawing houses and they'll put a detail in there, they know what's going to be that non-standard detail for the most part. And so I try to at least when having those conversations with the builder, and I don't hesitate to have conversations with subcontractors on site either.
Yeah.
I think it's important to engage the process on all these levels to say, okay, this detail is a little different. Let's review it. But a lot of that comes out in millwork details as well.
Oh yeah.
It might be some sort of cabinet configuration or something going on in the guts of the cabinet. Oftentimes these details are how and when different materials come together, or joints
Right.
of a house. It could be interior or exterior, and it's often needed to address in rough stage as well as finished stage, because otherwise the finished stage you just won't be able to make up for it if the rough is done wrong.
Yeah, definitely. So, just going back briefly to the kind of the lack of builder licensure and things like that in Texas, what other problems does that create in your mind?
So I feel like in my experience, most people that are lacking experience tend to just make up for it in confidence and expectations of what they're capable of, and for sure assumptions. And so there's just the process is just kind of like charged along and marched along without these face checks that we talked about. There's a lack of thoroughness. I think in order to really successfully build a project, you need to be thorough. This is not rocket science, but you need to be thorough. You
Yeah.
need to
It's just paying attention most
Yes.
of the time.
Yes, and you need to be able to be thorough in understanding of the project, and that means understanding the drawings, specifications, your site conditions, etc. And then understanding the process of these phase checks, of engaging with your subcontractors, and also properly engaging with the clients. If it's in the custom world of construction and design, there needs to be a level of engagement with clients that a lot of people aren't accustomed to, that are maybe newer to the process, or maybe not as educated in the process, and they need to pay attention to the communication side of things, and maybe not either willing nor are able to, whether it's because of the way they've structured their contract with them, or they're just spread too thin in other areas. The time needed to devote to communication to especially the clients, but all parties, is just it's just not there.
Doing the phase checks, the CA, all that stuff, it actually helps everyone involved. It's not just the architect covering his butt on stuff, right?
Right.
It's the point is, you know, it's all for the betterment of the consumer and the project, but it, liability wise, it helps the builder, it helps the engineer, it helps the architect. I
That's
mean,
right.
by having all these parties verifying things as they go, it lessens liability. It lessens the chances of something catastrophic happening down the road, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It ultimately, that thoroughness creates a much more stable and longer lasting product. I mean, we're all concerned about liability. It's a big issue,
Yeah.
but ultimately, like what's kind of driving that is, well, I also want my clients to be safe
Yeah,
in the house,
for sure.
and be healthy in the house, and thrive there. And in order to do that, we need to not just provide a good design, but also provide good quality construction in a way that's recommended by all of the various manufacturers of the products that we're using in the house. And so being thorough, being educated, which is often not the case with people who come in with little experience and lack of licensure and so forth. Those are all really important components to making sure that we're all protected from liability, which is just kind of like necessarily part of the process, but also what drives that, and that's to have a healthy and safe space for the clients.
Yeah. So, other than the architect doing CA, what are some other common things that what other parties would come in and also do some inspections along the way, aside from the city?
Yeah, you always have the city.
Yeah.
You've always got the regulatory agencies.
Yeah.
Some more involved than others, but ultimately, I think that's a good thing for the most part, because it forces us to slow down and check. We're of course we're going to run into frustrations with that, but so there's also third party inspections for big important part is the structural component of a house, whether it be weld inspections, different nail pattern inspections, anything that there's a drawing for. Even like every time I come to a job site, I'm technically on an inspection,
Yeah.
so the structural inspections are really important.
Engineer.
Yep, having the engineer involved, and a lot of times engineers will also have a third party do the inspections for them, so that they're not like verifying themselves.
Yeah.
Which is I think a really good one.
Smart.
And then depending on the consultants that are hired, the third party building performance consultants are doing their own checks and tests on the house, whether it be the thermal performance of the house. Another one that is
Air leakage testing.
Yep, air leakage testing is a big one. Another one that I've used as well, which I think is really valuable, is not a consultant on the front end, but as a third party inspection. And that's a building envelope inspection, looking for where there's a nail penetration that should have been sealed.
Yeah.
Making sure the sheathing, if we're using zip, that everything is sealed properly, or even some manufacturers offer inspections, building wrap.
Yeah, for sure.
You can call different manufacturers who have reps in the area to come out and inspect your installation.
Yeah, we've done that a lot.
Yeah,
That's
which
great.
is
It's free.
It's free, and it reinforces your warranty on the product.
Those guys like it too, actually, because they'll come out and like take pictures and video and say, hey, here's our product being used on this house.
Yeah, that's right.
And so, that's a benefit for them too. So they'll come out for free and give you some advice.
Yeah, that's right. And that tracks through a lot of finishes as well. If you're using any sort of specialty finish, the vendor or rep will come out and inspect the installation and how it's executed, if it's done right, if they're, that's a valuable service that I think a lot of builders, especially uneducated, maybe not licensed, or I guess you don't have to be in Texas. Nobody does.
No one's licensed. At least not here.
Yeah, that's right. But those are things that people that don't have that type of experience and that are not as thorough will not take advantage of.
Yeah. They don't know that they can, or they don't have those relationships necessarily with those sales reps and companies, because oftentimes it's just, hey, let's buy whatever's cheapest and get this done.
Oh yeah.
They're not necessarily going through a rep. So that makes a big difference. So, all these checks and inspections, the whole goal is just to give the consumer a better product. The side benefit is offer some protection. So it's just all around a good thing to do.
Absolutely. The more checks, the better. And kind of going back to an earlier topic of these pauses in construction, oftentimes they don't have to actually cause a pause.
Yeah.
There's, if planned and coordinated and everybody has a really great sense of communication, and communication is happening between architect, builder, reps, vendors, etc., these things can happen in a planned way that don't cause delays, or at least not massive delays in construction.
And often those are kind of natural pauses anyway. Like, for example, if you're pouring a slab foundation after the grade beams get dug and the rebar gets put in, whatnot, the concrete doesn't usually get poured the same day. I mean, sometimes it does, but it's pretty rare.
Yeah.
So there's usually like a natural pause where you get a day where the city's coming out to do their inspection. And so, you're not costing time by doing this unless there's a problem that has to be corrected. Same thing with framing. I mean, you're going to have this big pause while you're waiting anyway for the city to send out their electrical and plumbing and mechanical and framing. And so you already have this pause that's already built into the schedule. So
that's right.
There's not really a time.
Good builder will bake that right into the schedule.
Yeah, there's not like a time penalty for it necessarily, unless there's a problem discovered, and there could be. I guess the last thing on the verification topic, some people are like, well, the city's inspecting it. So the city inspectors have, in my experience, like certain things they look for. And a lot of times it might be something that their boss is like, hey, y'all, this is our pet topic of the month. Be watching for this. And or if it's like an old inspector, he's like, I always check for this, and he may not care about anything else. I mean, we've had inspectors walk on the job sites, walk in the front gate, look around, be like, all right, looks good. Here's your green tag. Bye. I mean, like literally will not look at anything and he'll pass our inspection.
Yeah.
Not the city of Houston. They would never do that. Some city I have operated in might have done that, but
right.
Not knocking any particular city, of course. But yeah, so we've had plenty of inspections where the guy just walks in the gate, hands us a green tag, and walks back out. Because those guys are overloaded.
Yep.
The city of Houston, like most cities, I'm sure, is very short staffed. It's like a record number of plans being submitted, record number of inspections being requested every day. They just can't physically do it all. So I guess what I'm saying is don't count on the city to catch problems, because that's not really what they do.
Well, yeah, that's right. And they do catch problems.
They do catch some. Yeah. I'm not saying it's worthless.
Right. No,
sure.
You're absolutely right. Like, but the thing is like you had said, they're short staffed. There's a lot of new hires, and they oftentimes have either a checklist or a very specific set of things they're looking for. And they're often not looking for even best practice. There's multiple tiers of inspections.
Yeah.
Right. You have to meet code, and sometimes code is best practice, or
sometimes code's just the bare minimum to get by. Yeah.
Sometimes the code, yeah, that's right. And what's also interesting is a lot of times, and I experienced this more so on the front end in design, the city will defer to manufacturer specs. And so if we design something into the project and the city flags it, you gets a permit comment back. Oftentimes, I've had it multiple times where I've submitted manufacturer specifications after contacting the manufacturer saying, "Hey, am I using this correctly? Can you give me a sheet that's not on your website that says X, Y, and Z?" and submit that to the city, and they'll approve it like that. And so, city inspectors are often not looking at those, like what the manufacturer would recommend, because they're not specialized in that. That's not their job.
Yeah.
Their job is to kind of make sure the project meets, the current codes and city of wherever amendments, if there are any.
Yeah. And they also care less about fit and finish and quality and anything else, right?
That is absolutely right.
That's out of their purview. So if you're trusting the city to make sure your house is getting built well, probably not gonna have a good outcome.
Yeah. If you've specified level 5 finish of drywall and the wall is just heavily textured, city inspector is not going to get that.
All he cares about is there's drywall there. That's all he cares about. You could slap some paint on it and call it a day, and he's happy.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so aside from phase checks and catching issues, this is kind of more of a general question about when people go into building a custom home, what are just some common mistakes that people should be looking to avoid when they're entering into the custom home process or thinking about building a home?
Cost expectations are like a big one, and time expectations. I think it's reasonable. You have to start with a budget, obviously, but I think a mistake that people make is you start with a budget that you're like maxed out with, and then you don't have any room to go up. Always have to have room to go up, because whether it's an unforeseen circumstance or a trip to wherever where you saw this tile that you can't live without, that's twice the cost, you've got to have that room for increasing the price of the contract.
Or economic factors like we had recently where lumber just went through the roof.
That's a massive
it could be used.
Component. That's right. And part of that is how you structure your contract as well. It's really important to know what you're signing, what you're getting into, and what your contract is. And so, kind of backing up a little further though, being able to be willing to engage the right amount of professionals and the right professionals to be able to do it. Like we had talked about earlier with like who should be part of the team. You should not skimp on who should be part of the team. It's going to be more costs in upfront costs and design and prep, but it's absolutely 100% worth it to invest in the right consultants and trade people that know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Right in the beginning. And I would be leery of anybody that says, "Oh no, you don't need so and so or whatever."
That's a waste of money. You don't need to hire that guy.
Yeah, it's a waste of money to hire X whatever designer or whatever. Ultimately, it might be, but you need to like work through that process with somebody. But having the right people involved, having a right budget, making sure that you know your contract, and now we're kind of like moving through the process, making sure you know the contract, what you're signing, how it's structured, what your obligations are, and then also knowing the drawings when the time comes. And I often have clients when a client is find something that they don't expect. It's usually because they also didn't ask a question. And so asking questions along the way, ask tons of questions. I think everybody needs to do that more in everything anyways.
Yeah.
It's like one of the things I try to instill in my son. If you can like just ask questions. If I teach you anything, ask a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And that goes to the same thing for this process as well with homeowners.
Be engaged.
That's right. There's a lot of moving parts here. And you're trusting the professionals, but it's also just ask as many questions as come up in your mind.
Yeah. That's a good segue in my next topic that I always touch on with everyone is, what's kind of the right type of person or the ideal person to go through the custom home process. And then on the backside of that, what person probably shouldn't go into this whole, year and a half long, 2 year, relationship with a group of people to build a custom home.
Yeah. That's a good question. That's difficult to answer. But I think there's a few factors that are may seem obvious to some, but may not to others. Time is a big thing. Like you had said, it's a years long process, depending on the project. Everybody needs to have time to devote to it. And that includes the people that you hire as well. Like, I think again, going back to asking these questions, ask what the workload is of these clients and if they can, or of your architect and designers to see like what you want can be put into their schedule.
Right.
So likewise, if you don't have the time to engage in a years long process, then don't do it.
Yeah.
There's plenty of product on the market.
Yeah.
That
if you have a deadline that you have to be in a house in 12 months, probably not a good idea.
Yes, that's right. And like I said about budget earlier too, you always have to have more. You need to allow more time for the process as well, especially in the days of pandemics.
Yeah.
And material shortages.
I mean, this is kind of a deeper philosophical discussion maybe, but it kind of goes along with that.
Let's do it.
Yeah. I think people have a tendency to want what they see, and they want what everybody else has got. And I have definitely seen people enter into the process that they want that shiny new house because all their friends have got it, and they're really stretching themselves to make it happen. And if that's the case, it's probably not something you should do. Like if you're maxing out everything you got to build this house, and you're kind of counting on, well, it's going to appreciate, and I'm going to get a raise next year. Yeah, probably not the best way
Griswold.
Yeah, exactly. Counting on that bonus to build the pool, and then you get the jelly of the month. No, but seriously, I mean, that's like the deeper, it's like the American dream. I got to build that house. I got to keep up with the neighbors.
Yeah.
That's the attitude. Probably not the right thing for you to do.
Probably not the right fit. And yeah, like you said, this is kind of going into you have to really kind of take a look at yourself and say, okay, can I mitigate my expectations? Because when you hire somebody, you should have expectations, but you should also be able to communicate them clearly.
Yeah.
And if you're not able to do that, whether it's in writing or in person or in precedents, like what you're looking for in the project, then just take a step back and work with a realtor to find a really beautiful move-in ready space.
Yeah.
And another one is just being able to, outside of devoting the right amount of time to it, I guess just having the kind of energy for it, or the tolerance level to deal with people that you sometimes don't want to deal with.
Yeah.
Because you go through pain, you take all these pains to hire an architect that you like, hire a builder that you like, but there's still like going to be many people you don't want to deal with.
Right.
Yeah. So having some patience to let the process work is a big thing. Like, if you don't have any patience, don't do it.
Yeah.
Just walk away.
The common theme has been, people who are willing to be engaged in the process, who trust the process, and then having realistic expectations and a realistic budget. Like those kind of four things are really what you got to have if you're going to go into this.
Yeah. But that's those expectations are that's a process. You've got to be able to find the right people that can help you mitigate those expectations.
Yeah.
Because how do you know? You've never done, most people have never done this before.
Right.
You got to be able to trust those people to do it, which kind of saying a lot in our industry sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
For reasons we've talked about already.
Yeah. So what last thing, and I always ask this question as well, and not that I wanted to like bring anything down or end on a bad note, but I always ask people if they have any stories about a project where things have not gone well, or maybe it's a disaster, and then maybe what in your mind could have been done for that not to happen.
Projects that don't turn out well, that happens for a lot of reasons. But as far as like things that we can control, there's all kinds of things that are out of our control, us as professionals. But there are certain things that we can control, certain things we can't control. One is kind of having our own process sorted out and worked out. I've been part of projects where there's just been there was a lot of turnover. There was a lot of in the staff, in the construction staff, in the design staff. There wasn't a lot of continuity in the project. And as business owners, it's hard to sometimes assure that will be the case. But it also goes to the company that a client is hiring to say, okay, I understand if things turn over, but like, we as business, we got to understand that and kind of mitigate that ourselves.
Yeah.
Which is just a really difficult thing to do, but there are ways to kind of do that.
Sure.
But so there was a lack of continuity in the project, but there was kind of the things out of our control, which goes back to clients not understanding the contract, not understanding the drawings, and not willing to devote the time to the project to understand it. There were I have presented drawings, I have presented renderings, physical samples, and mock-ups of certain elements of a house. And then when it actually goes to get installed, the client said, "This is not what we decided."
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Tell me more about this, because we went through a lot of work to get here. And so that was a kind of a constant theme throughout the project. And so the lack of continuity on the company side, the lack of engagement on the client side, made for just a challenging process. Lots and lots of changes. Lots and lots of changes.
I have one of those right now, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I hate to say.
And changes are going to happen. And they're not bad. It's just they need to happen, if at all possible, incrementally and in a kind of prepared way. Having a massive unexpected change from a client, because they didn't understand the drawings, that's not just all of their fault either. Like, some of it needs to be done on our end. We need to do our due diligence.
Right.
That's why I said, I feel like 90% of my job is mitigating expectations.
Yeah.
And it really is. Being able to understand where I think blind spots are with clients and say, hey, I just want to make sure you guys understand this, or this is, how what we're doing and how we're doing it. And then there's various ways to do that throughout the process. And we're gonna miss it, and that's why we have changes. But like I said, let's do little changes along the way, and we can get there.
Yeah. You mentioned continuity. If there's turnover, one way to mitigate that is kind of, I mean, as a builder, I always have to be concerned about that. I mean, I have some good project managers, but what happens if one of them quits, retires, gets hit by a bus? Um, so you always have to be thinking, okay, if something happens to this key person during the project, how does that continue to the new person that comes in? How do they quickly grasp the project and kind of carry the torch? And so one of the things that we do, and I see a lot of good builders doing, is it boils down to just good record keeping, really. It's having some kind of software in place, a project management software where you're capturing all the details, you're capturing all the project communication. It's basically it's a journal, everything that's happened on the project.
That's right.
And having all of that in one place is really essential. Even down to saying, Mr. Client, I know you love to text me, but I really need you to send our communication through our software.
Yeah.
That way it captures our whole conversation. And if, Joe project manager does get hit by a bus, guess what? I don't have to go find his cell phone from his grieving
Right.
wife. Now I can, here's a record in our software of everything that you guys have ever talked about,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so the new guy can kind of pick it up and run with it. So that's always a concern for me. And so I think for people, listening and watching, if they are looking for a builder, that's one thing to look at, is to say, hey, how do you manage your projects? What kind of software do you use? How do you ensure that if something happens to your key personnel, how do you ensure my project's going to finish strong?
Yeah. Great question to ask. And it also goes back to having that broad team of professionals, because if you're just buying plans from the internet,
Yeah,
and then you hand them to a builder and say, okay, build this, then and that happens, then there's nobody else to ask questions
yeah,
to, or y- having an architect, having the all these consultants, having inspections along the way. That's how you help mitigate that as well.
sure. Yeah, of course, because like you and the engineer and everybody else is going to have been a part of that process.
That's
They're going
right.
to have been,
I could be working with your construction manager,
yeah.
something can happen, and then you might not know whatever, but you can call me and say, hey, what did you guys talk about with this?
Hey, come do a walkthrough with the new
That's
guy
right.
and relay some of that information that may not have been captured on paper or in the software.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And if you're old school construction guy has an adverse relationships with architects, then I'm going to be a little hesitant to
Yeah.
come. That's not true, but it won't be as fun.
I'm not hating on all the old school builders. There's some good ones out there. There's also some extremely crusty old architects who hate builders.
Dude, it is, like I said before, a two-way street. I've worked with some really great people on the construction and art design side of all age ranges, all experiences, and yeah, they definitely run the gamut.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, I think that's about all the time we have for today.
Cool.
So I really appreciate you being here and being a part of this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
If our listeners and viewers want to talk to you and work with you, tell them how they can find you.
Yeah, you can go to ordinaryarc.com, or check us out on Instagram as well. Just the same ordinary arc.
Awesome. Well, I'll be sure and put your website and contact info
Cool.
in the show notes as well. So people want to reach out to you, they can find you there. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Curtis.
That's it for today's episode of the Your Project Shepherd Construction Podcast. And just remember that as we talked about in our chat today, we teach that those 4 key components have to be there on every project. That foundation is planning. The left wall is your team, the right wall is communication, and the roof is proper execution. Stick around for our next episode. And we'll continue the story of Brian and Heather and kind of wrap things up and see where they land in this journey to get this house built. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.